Hello and welcome to the semifinals of the Champ of Champs, coming to you from the Greater Columbus Convention Center in Columbus, Ohio, courtesy of Heroes in Games. Big shout out to Doug Sims, put together a great event to wrap up the season. Doug Sims runs Heroes in Games. If you find yourself in the Columbus area, head on over and check it out. They have a singles section in their singles case with OverPower in it. I haven't seen that since basically the late 90s, so that was fantastic to see. And yeah, I've got my co-commentator here for a lot of the matches this time, David McMillan, co-founder of Lazarus Rising Games, one of my good friends. How's it going, Dave?
Going great. I think this is going to be a really interesting matchup between a veteran player, a multi-time champion, and Phil Miller, and Joe Peters, who is just one of our most creative deck builders and has really re-entered the Overpower community by force. Just creative deck building and really good performances.
Yeah, top aiding like pretty much from his first outing. I want to say was Oklahoma. No, that was his second one, I think. But he's really only been playing for about a year. So, they this is going to be a great match. You know, we talked a little bit about Phil's deck last time, so we've seen Phil, I think, several times on this stream. But to go over at Joe Peters is playing the Hobgoblin, which I'm so excited to see. Hobgoblin, like we've been talking about, he's kind of a character that's been considered unplayable in a competitive environment. And Joe Peters and one of the other people in the top four, Carl Carafino, they actually had a bet going into this tournament who could do better with Hobgoblin. And they've both made it to the semifinals. So Carl Carafino is playing Justin Sadie. Joe Peters is here playing Phil Miller. If they were both to win, Dave, we could see a finals table where both decks are using Hobgoblin. Which again, this is so fun to see so many new characters that are finding a viable home in the meta. Why do you think that is? Do you have any theories as to why suddenly we're able to see so much, not just more experimentation in which characters are being used, but seeing a lot of success in that?
So what I would say is it's a two-part, answer. I think mechanically we've done a lot to toot our own horns at Lazarus Rising Games to open up the environment to new strategies by adding, the new home bases, open up new strategies, add additional defense in the game that's not tied to a character. And then obviously for a long time the environment was just stifled by the presence of Devourer of Worlds. That was the old any hero that said the opponent couldn't play their activators until they dropped 4 activators on it. And that was just really made using battle sites a challenge. And battle sites, while they can be very interesting in terms of how they function, they add so much flavor to the game and so much ability to flexibly defend or summon unique effects that are character specific. So I think that's the part one. And then very quickly, part two is I think just shout out to the community. I think a lot of people finally got tired of just running back variations of the Cadillac, of Heroes for Hires, and of Beyonder, and have really dug deep into the bag of tricks. And now, with the support in the environment with those home bases and these battle sites, you're starting to see Galactus win a tournament. Big shout out to Andrew Taylor. You're starting to see, two Hobgoblins in the top eight, not even top eight, the top final four now of the Champ of Champions. That's amazing. So shout out to the community, the creativity we're seeing. And I think what we've done with the environment has let people be creative and competitive.
I completely agree. Especially, I'd say we've been really careful to not just ban cards. You know, we've really tried to introduce new cards that don't create a power creep, but just open up other avenues of strategy in the game so that other ways to play are viable and competitive. And I think, unfortunately, at some point, like that card that came out of X-Men, the Devourer of Worlds, was just incredibly stifling to creativity. And by banning that one card, I really do attribute a lot of watching the environment open up. And I think even the people that were against it, that we tried 3 different incremental nerfs to make the card a little weaker. I think just getting rid of it was so much better for the game. And I think anyone that still plays agrees at this point, just from what they've seen and how much more fun it's been. So one of the great things that we're going to have, Dave, as we head over to the table for this match, the Phil Miller just played a game on camera with you and was the gentleman that knocked you out of the tournament, and Joe Peters was the gentleman who knocked me out of the tournament. So
Rub
we're
it in,
gonna
why don't you?
we're both commentating on the game of the people who knocked us out in the top eight. As we've said each round, if you're randomly just tuning into this video first, we are doing all the commentary after the fact. This was the last game before the Edgar Rice Burroughs set dropped, and all us Lazarus Rising Games people really wanted to play in the last tournament. So we decided to do the commentary after. We'll be dropping these videos most likely this week, the week of Monday, March 10th going onward. But it kind of affords us a nice, it lets us sometimes commentate on our own games. And, sometimes it is a little fun thing that I don't think is going to happen next season at all because I plan on doing all the commentary live. Um, but let's head to the table here. So both people are drawing their decks. So let's see if Phil, having come into this tournament, lost his first two rounds, just scraped in as the eighth seed, is going to be able to take out Joe Peters, who I agree, like you said, right from day one back in the game, has been competitive, has been hitting top eights. I think we'll see him as a tournament victor soon, and builds unbelievably interesting, wacky decks that work, which is really fun. So
So I think Joe led off with the event. I think he's running the crossing. Is that the no
no
energy
energy
power
power.
card? So
Yep, no energy
that's
power cards may be played.
you can see Phil has at least one, maybe two energy power cards in hand. So this is a good start for Joe. Now he does have an 11 any attack, one per deck, magnetic devastation, I believe, for Magneto that's not playable. And he also has the Hobgoblin Avoid he placed, which is playable by Hobgoblin and Beyonder, but Phil could avoid that by attacking Beast the Brute. So um, I like Joe's position here. I'm not sure if he's going first or not. We might have missed that. But he's in a good position, but also I'm not sure you can bet too much more because he has two cards himself that might not be active.
Yeah. Joe should be going first. Joe is placing the fourth card, then Phil's placing the fourth. It'll be interesting to see if Phil places the seven. So as of right now, he's got a seven and an eight energy, which are not playable at all. So if he places those, Joe's going to be able to card count those. Joe's not going to be able to assume, however, that the teamworks aren't. Phil can only play one of his teamworks, but Joe's not going to know that. Now, Joe in his hand, he's got a seven brute force. Strength. Seven strength slash brute force. So Beast is gonna have a power card that can defend. He's gonna put a 5 multi-power on Beyonder. And you're right though. Phil can target Beast and essentially make that avoid useless. But one of the things that's creative about these decks. So Joe has placed that avoid on the home base, and since Beyonder can play any character's non-one protect specials, that avoid can be played from that home base placing slot by either Hobgoblin or the Beyonder. So it does ward two of the more important people on his team, but it does leave a pretty obvious path to try to take out his negate. Now,
Now,
go ahead.
one thing I'm interested in, he chose Stark Enterprises as his battle site. And first, let me say I love Stark Enterprises. You have the Marvel's Avoid and Draw from Iron Man. You do get a negate an opponent discard. I assume his one per deck is Action Leader, but I wonder if this could be suited to have a lockout type battle site, so he could lock out Beast. But
He might have something like that, but I with Magneto coming up with the 11 and Action Leader being a huge venture swing, I would think he would want to play the Action Leader. You set yourself up in a battle where if you wipe a few hits off a character, you bring Magneto up, and I mean, what's he running? Like if it's Hobgoblin or the Beyonder, there's not really any reason to not do it. Beast might have the 9 or the Stars and Garters that you lose if you have to do it early, but not a lot of risk if you're going for a big bet.
so it looks like he let off with a 4 strength against Spawn, and Spawn responds with a Beast Activator and throws out Acrobatics, uh, only universe attacks. So this is great. So here's a closer look at what we have going on Joe's side of the table. Again, Hobgoblin's interesting because he's a 3 stat. His stats are what, 363?
He's
So
essentially a 16-point character. If you're only running one 3 grid, you add 4, and then if you're running a second one, you can add 5 if you want to stay with the 76-point range. So that would essentially make him and Magneto very inexpensive characters.
yeah, Joe blocks that teamwork attack with a 7 strength or brute force power card, and then Phil follows up with a 1 coming across as a 2, I believe, and Beast uses that too. Um,
Now, I think, Phil did decide to use the Beast only universe here immediately. And I think if I'm playing against Phil and I see one of his site's only lockouts coming out first hand, first attack, and I've still got my whole hand to start to paint another character, I think I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, I think he's doing Joe the right thing. He's attacking Mole Man, who's the max sixer after he kind of went after Spawn. And you got that lockout out. So, anytime you start to exhaust the battle site's actions, he got him to use acrobatics and Shadowcat's a ninja adept, the 6 any power defense. So it's a good start. It looks like he's gonna win venture, I believe. Phil has one in hand. There's 4 damage, and Phil looks like he's conceding. Joe shows up the Scarlet Witch activator, and Phil had a morph left. So you drew first blood, you won your first venture. Now Phil has a nice placement advantage. The Strangler is great at this. He's carrying 2 power cards and a teamwork to really Joe's perhaps usable avoid. So
Now,
this is going to be a back and
unfortunately,
forth.
we're not always the best at monitoring this, so their missions are completely off camera. So we're not really going to have a good sense of what they're betting or where the game is, which does make the commentary a little tougher. But clearly, in that situation, Phil ran and maintained a little bit of a placing advantage. Now, Joe's coming back and placing a 9 on Beast and 8 on the Beyonder. So he's interestingly too playing the 8 any power, most likely so he can dodge his own event.
Yeah,
Um,
so it's interesting. The no icon events. And we've added obviously in the new promo set 30 years of overpower, the no attacks with an intellect icon. I think any powers are good flexibility to try to dodge those events. As you saw from my last match, I'm running 1/8 any power, and I'm not using an 8 energy, and I'm not using the energy event. I just don't want to run into that. I just want those 8 points of venture. So I guess great minds think alike. Great job, Joe. I do love the 8 any power.
all right. Joe's getting some power cards down. At this point, I think Joe is just trying to mitigate what he knows Phil's going to do, which is Phil is willing to lose a few of those early battles to really build up and try to manage that placing advantage. So Phil's got 8 cards placed. He's got some of his defense down on spawn. And Joe's essentially got 6 cards plays that he knows he can play, but he does have that avoid that wards 2 of the characters. The 11 is unplayable. So Phil's doing what he does, which is always, he'll always tend to have 1 or 2 more cards placed unless you're just gonna brute force place them all and try to beat him in the dupes. So Joe gets placed out. I think Joe's a little worried about his defense, and Joe is going to concede this battle.
No, I didn't get to see what Joe threw away. I want to bring up a strategic thought. Sometimes for these situations where you run, I like to try to stay for a moment because that finite power on spawn is a very important part of offense, and it'd be nice to try to make Phil spend it. Or sometimes when players don't want to spend those cards, the card actually ends up being dead, right? Because you count that as part of your placement or your war chest. But if you don't play it earlier, you're trying not to play it. There's sometimes times where you can suck out. So I didn't get to see what Peters folded, but I like to sometimes stay and make the person, all right, throw your finite power, and then I leave.
So Phil does have 2 duplicates. I didn't get a good look at Joe, but he looks to have pretty close to a full hand here. So Joe may have made up the extra card advantage Phil had from the placing by not dropping any cards. Now,
Now,
Joe's playing the crossing, so he is running teamworks, but it looks like he just is failing to draw them.
that's what I was about to point out. It's so difficult. those placement slots, particularly the universe placements where you might only have anywhere from 4 to 9 in your deck, he's just not, having a draw where he can get those teamworks out there. I do wonder if he's using any allies. I think myself and Phil Miller are both huge fans of using at least a few allies to flesh out that slot a little more. You do see there's a 3 strength ally placed to White Queen. So, yeah, it's an unfortunate draw right now for Joe that he hasn't been able to place those to those slots and catch up on the placement battle.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Joe's making a venture again. Unfortunately, sometimes throughout the day, these matches shift, and we can't see the bet. Um, does make it a little tough to really know exactly what the stakes are, but I'd say they've gone pretty light on the betting back and forth here. Other than the first battle, I think we're going into hand four. There's been a placing and running by both of them, trying to set up the big battle, but both of them have bet. Both of them are in. Phil is opening this up now, so I think we're gonna see some actual play. So Phil's gonna open up with an ally here, and I think we're probably gonna see the finite power be the follow up right after. Try to pin somebody and just set
Right.
the tone.
He's gonna follow up with the energy staff. 5 energy, uh, may not be defended by a special card, and Joe will use the 6 fighting. That seems prudent. Now, going back to my point from the last battle, you can see Phil's trying, I think, to not use the finite power. If I'm Joe, part of my goal this battle is just to get him to play it. And if he doesn't play it, that ends up becoming a dead card. So we'll see how Phil puts this offense together. Joe counters with this strength teamwork. I'm assuming it's either from Beyonder or Beast the Brute.
That's actually the 8. So it's actually no, that's the 7. Yeah,
That's
so
a
I'm not.
7.
That's the 7. That's the 7. Those
So
old ones all,
Phil
all have the same photo, and I forget.
Phil uses a basic to pump up a power card and defend that first part. Joe throws a one fighting follow up onto spawn. I know in some past videos I've talked about not wanting to spread damage, but this is definitely one where it makes sense because it's only a one. You're not getting any more cumulative on Mole Man, so just try to get someone else's spectrum going. It looks like Phil's gonna let that hit and then come with another teamwork coming after Beast hard. Just he knows he wants to get rid of his negator. We'll see what Joe counters with. Captain America activator to use his avoid.
And that's good. We're seeing Phil is exhausting a lot of his main defense off his site, and Joe has not used a lot of big things. Joe, though, is going to use a pretty big card here. That's his avoid power card and draw. I'm not sure I love this play here, only because Joe has Oh,
Oh
wow.
no!
So brutal. So
Overpower is so
brutal.
fickle sometimes. So for the audience, that was Joe's kill event that would have killed a character on both sides. It is oftentimes the primary victory condition for Beyonder decks. Just you put that card out, and any other opponent that's not using a clone or otherwise, like Beyonder, they just lose a hero. And so to avoid and draw that, not only did he not gain the card, which he probably counted in his math for this battle, but now he does not get to have that event going forward in the game. That's such a huge swing.
Now I really like this. So Joe had 3 cards in hand. He had a lot of heat. Joe threw the 3 intelligence attack, which is the Masters of Evil card for Hobgoblin. It's a 3 intelligence attack. If you defend it, you have to discard a card from hand. Now Phil didn't want. He apparently didn't want Spawn to get painted up with 2 colors there. So he chose to defend it with the 6 energy from his hand and discard the Shadow Cat activator. He chose to maintain all his placed cards, which makes sense. But they're really going into this with Phil's running again from another battle, but they're really going into this with Phil
Ooh.
building up that placing advantage.
So Phil just had a duplicate, I believe, spell of protection for Doctor Strange in reserve, as well as a duplicate protector of the innocent, 9 or less avoid for Spawn. So Phil's gonna have to weather some of these bad draws. Is what you just talked about. His placement mitigation is helping him, but he is really drawing a good deal of duplicates.
And I will say for the matches we've saw for Phil today, kudos to his play. Phil has been pretty poor. He's been drawing very poorly for this deck. He's been drawing 1 to 2 duplicates almost every hand we've seen him play. He duped an 8 and a 7 last hand. We saw even the previous game, and maybe that's why he's playing the Assault on Onslaught mission set that he is, what lets him draw cards and keep a couple dupes just to help mitigate this. But again, Joe Peters is not drawing enough universe cards to fill those slots in and mitigate this placing. And he hasn't drawn his aspect yet. He hasn't drawn his reserve character. Doesn't have useful cards. So Phil has been able to just fill out a few extra placing slots, and is just going to maintain this advantage if he can ever get to a hand where he doesn't drop 2 duplicates.
Yeah, going back to this battle site choice, I really do think sometimes that the avoid and draw or draw heavy kind of battle sites don't always pair well when you have these really strong events that you don't want to have, killed that way. I mean, it is a 1 in 1,000, couple thousand chance that that happens, but you really hate to see it. You know that if Joe could have gotten that KO event off, I think, the win percentage chances for him just skyrocket. And so I'd love to see, this deck maybe with a deck that doesn't have a void and draw and something more towards the lockout type thing. But that's just me.
So Phil did something interesting here. So Joe Peters plays Stars and Garters, and it looks like Phil chose to defend it offensive. He chose to let it. No, all right. I guess he was just thinking. So Phil negated the Stars and Garters as it came out, and he is going to go to one of his placed cards, which we don't normally see. But I think what you're seeing here is Phil is hiding a JW in his hand. He's hoping Joe Peters will let a low hit, and he can go JW3 7 energy and try to snake a kill out. But Joe's play. Okay, this is great. So Joe locks out Beast with only Universe. Now Joe's playing the best Hobgoblin card there is. So this card gets negated, but just so you know what it would have done, it says for remainder of the game, not battle, Hobgoblin can make all of his attacks, numerical or non-numerical, face down, and Phil would have to guess the defense. Now Phil also, the card says the opponent may discard 2 cards from the top of draw pile into dead pile to reveal the attack. So you have to either choose to mill yourself quickly to the power pack or try to blindly defend any cards funneled through Hobgoblin. And of course, Phil uses his main negate, which he has had a dupe of already, and then his battle site negate to make sure that that effect doesn't happen. And that's clearly the right play.
Yeah, definitely.
Joe's probably a bit bummed where he probably thought he was going to be able to sneak that card through where Phil chose to negate the Stars and Garters.
Yeah, and that's a great decision by Phil to not let it resolve. Ooh, another one of those three, and if you block it, you have to pitch.
So that
So
means Phil actually can't block it with the card in his hand. Phil could choose to use a placed card and discard the card from his hand. But actually, I say that, Dave. You're the rule. Maybe I'm wrong about that. If Phil had no cards in hand, can he block and just discard no cards in hand?
that's a great question. I'd have to read how it exactly reads. I don't have my OverPower client up to look at that MOE graphic. I think it would depend on whether it's like a if successful type cost or whether it's a cost you pay to do the ability. It's just a wording.
I think the ruling would be that you don't have to for a couple of reasons. I know if I only have 2 cards in hand and you play Colossus's Siberian Strength, which is discard 3 cards from hand, it's essentially discard up to 3 cards. You would still discard the 2 in hand. So Phil does, he clearly plays it that way. He blocks with an activator from hand, and then I believe he conceded there again. So again, sorry guys, we apologize for not being able to see the missions, but it feels like Joe Peters should have a pretty significant venture advantage at this point. It seems like Phil has conceded a lot of this game. He hasn't really been able to capitalize on damage to really set up his JWs as kill shots. So Joe's done a great job of mitigating draws where he's just seems like most of his universe cards are buried.
Yeah. I um I think the challenge here, we'll see if Joe's deck starts to turn around, or if maybe he's just not playing many universes. Just not having those universe slots filled up has just let Phil, while Phil's been on the run, you and I both know Phil is very diligent about protecting his place cards, and he's willing to, concede until he gets to the moment that he wants to kind of take the battle. And then sometimes you're just on the run afterwards. So we'll see if Joe Peters can capitalize. Ooh, a duplicate 7 AR for Hobgoblin. That's interesting that he's playing multiple of those. They're both counting their actions.
I will say that even though it's unfortunate when you dupe on the 7, we do sometimes forget 7 is so much venture, and
Yeah.
Joe is in a position where if Hobgoblin or Beyonder die, can still play those 7s. And so it may just be a question of trying to keep the average venture value of every card that goes through high, or have the low cards be like hits that are more devastating.
So I did see Phil draw an extra card. So I think we can assume that Joe has gone more than two and perhaps three or four for the win. We'll see if he can take it down if it is for the win. And he's looking at one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight directly viable place cards, with also that Hobgoblin Avoid as maybe a ninth. I can't see how many cards he has in hand. He's got a nice, sum of. He's got some juice out here. I like his chances. I wish he could have gotten Phil to play that finite power in one of those earlier battles. We'll see if that swings this moving forward.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if Joe is going for the win here. One thing I'll say, having played Joe at I think every tournament I've played in, we've had at least one match. Joe is a very confident player. Joe is definitely not the kind of player that's unsure when to go for the win. Joe had a lot of experience in this game back in the day. He played a ton of Overpower in its original life, and he hasn't lost a step. I feel like of people that come back to the game or of new, I'll say Joe is completely confident in his venturing abilities. So Joe's thinking about the 7, but then he reaches back and just fires off the 9. That's a little surprising to me considering Phil has the 9 or less avoid placed at the home base.
So my guess would be this is for game point. Beast is the hero that has some damage on him, and he wants to make sure that he gets that off before Beast dies. Now, Beyond, I remember, has access to that Hobgoblin Avoid, so he's a bit better protected than Beast was.
And he may to I think you're exactly right. You're onto something here. He may actually want to let Beast die. A lot of players, if they're not particularly savvy, they'll throw some low spectrum hits on a character trying to get the kill. And sometimes the move at a game point situation is to just let the character die to make him have to go through an avoid.
Right.
So, Phil does like getting the full value for the 9 or less, but Phil's a good enough player that I think you'll see him stack up either the any power teamwork or the on site things when he goes for um so interesting. This is a very interesting play.
So I think he had to put finite power there, kind of knowing that Hobgoblin and Beyonder both can use that of pure avoid that's been placed the whole game. And Joe lets that hit, and I think that makes sense. It's probably a one for one trade at this moment, unless Joe has some beast cards in his hand. And Beast, he threw the four strength and the nine and stars and garters. I don't think Beast has much left.
Or at least not anything that he would want to offensively negate other than the stars and garters. So that would be considered an attack that would stop it from doing. I don't know.
Right.
I gotta say, I disagree with this play from Phil. I think you throw it at the Beyonder to try to lock down an 8 and a 7, and that's how you get through the avoid.
Look, I do agree with you. But Phil's a very great player, and I think I understand where he's coming from. That when you carry a finite power that long, he carried it for at least three battles, maybe four. you're looking for it to hit. You're hoping that there's value. But you and I, as we just talked about, I don't think that Beast has much left. I think he's really just getting that teamwork.
Hmm. I like Joe's play here. You know, he could have tried to throw that 4 somewhere else for Spectrum, but I like and this goes back to what you said, Dave. Sometimes spreading your damage early puts you in an awkward situation for cumulative. If that 4 from Moman would have made it on spawn, he'd be at 15 points of damage here. A 5 would be for the kill. I do like throwing the 4 there and just getting him up to 11, just getting him closer to that kill point.
Now,
People a lot of times, I think they take cumulative for granted, where I feel like a lot of times it's just a 4 card kill instead of a 3 card kill, and I think sometimes they're not willing to throw low power cards like a 4 on a target if it has the same icon, and I've found that that's generally not the best strategy.
yeah, I would agree. I think it can be good during one battle to spread your icons and spread your damage, but I think as the game progresses, cumulative becomes more relevant, and you'd rather be closer than farther away. I mean, that's I'm giving you some John Madden commentary there. The team that will win the game will have the greatest combination of field goals, touchdowns, and safeties. But it's this obvious thing with overpower. You have to do damage. You want to kill heroes, and cumulative is always an option, and you can't get there if you don't try.
All right.
So interestingly, Phil is still stacking Venture onto Beast after doing the finite power. And so going to your point earlier, I kind of feel like he shouldn't have put that there. I'm not sure that he got a lot of value for it.
Wow. So Joe does play. Sorry to interrupt. Joe
Action
does play
leader.
the card that we said. He plays Action Leader. He flops Beast to the back. We've seen both of Beast's one protects. So we're not really. He's not losing anything now in the game. The only thing that could possibly happen is if Phil shifts gears to Magneto. He could knock out Joe's ability to use a level 8 power cards. Um, that's something that could happen that could be rough, but Joe's also bringing up an 11 and representing a huge venture card.
Yeah.
And Phil's going to go right after him. He's not going to give Joe any quarters. So he's going to throw a 4 aspect. Joe's going to 5 any power in hand to make the block. Phil can now follow up with something. As much as Phil probably wants to start getting that JW pressure out, um, well, that's what he's going to do.
So he throws it to the Beyonder, which is nice because it cuts through or gets around that placed avoid for Hobgoblin. And he throws the 6. He uses the 8 any to block that. Now it'll be very interesting to see. I can't see Phil's hand. Does he have the energy staff?
He does not have the energy staff for Mole Man, which is not defensible by a special, but he is setting himself up to draw that in a future battle. Um, I don't like this play at all. One, I think he missed the basic universe.
He
Two,
did.
two, I think that like you've got the 8 there on Hobgoblin that you can create the same effect with and just make him use the 8. You can even throw the 7 off if you're going to use a placed card. I think that one was just getting a little greedy and throwing a haymaker at a time where you knew it wasn't going to go through.
Yeah, I really think he might have just missed the basics. It's still something that we all can. Oh, and Phil does the tuck. He uses the is
Man,
that
what? Yeah, that's the Holocaust talk. What a match with the amount of venture these two have mitigated. Joe Peters removed all of those hits off the beast. He completely healed him. Spawn is still injured, but Full has tucked those hits to the permanent record using Holocaust, making basically making the venture now 3-0. Now Joe's gonna fire off with the 7, and I think what you're gonna see here is I don't think Phil's gonna defend this. So Spawn is dead, I believe, even though no, Spawn is at 18. So that isn't actually for the kill. But I think what you're seeing here is had he thrown the 8, he
yeah.
either wouldn't have been able to tuck or would have had to have kept something else for the Um, would have had to keep something else to follow up for the Hobgoblin 8. Phil throws the 6 off the White Queen against the reserve. I like that as a play. Just like using the one you're most likely to get the hit on. All Phil wants to do here is just generate enough venture to not lose the game here. Now I remember actually from oh, I think Joe's misunderstanding this card. Joe wants to play this to avoid the 7, thinking it's a multi-power hit because it has more than one icon, but it's not how that works. A multi-power hit is more than one attack icon.
Right.
No, it doesn't count as more than one because you used an activator, and I think this is what Joe's asking. However, Joe can use it to remove the 4 multi off the Beyonder.
Correct. So I'm sure Phil is explaining the rule. He might need a ruling from
I
Doug
saw
or one of the judges. So
I saw a hand come over from the side, so they're clearly consulting a judge. Um,
yeah, when a card says multi-power attack or otherwise says card with more than one icon, um, it's referring to the card itself. It's not like a with an icon. So I'm fairly sure that deflect all calibers doesn't work on that 7 AR.
it absolutely doesn't. However, I don't know if Joe's understanding too that it works like an EE and he can remove the hit from the Beyonder, and then it's still played from Magneto. It would still ward Magneto against multi-power hits, or he could actually play it from the Beyonder and ward the Beyonder himself. But I think in this situation, removing a hit from Beyonder and creating the ward on Magneto so he can't be spectrumed by multi-power cards or multi-power cards at all would be the way because that would help a little bit protect his 8.
I agree. I want to rewind for a second just to that decision to throw the 11 any magnetic devastation. I think there was no rush with Magneto in terms of his damage level. He had just come up. He's an 8 ranker who has access to a lot of your power cards. I don't think he had to throw that so fast.
Nah, I think he got a little impetuous there, and I think it may cost him this hand. So Joe at least sees the removal. I don't know if he's realizing that Magneto could remove it and ward Magneto and help maintain his 8, but he's at
Yeah.
least got it on the Beyonder, and the Beyonder is going to be protected from any numerical cards that have multi-icons. So, for example, that 3 there is a good example. He could have warded Magneto so that 3 wasn't for the Spectrum, and then Phil could have either thrown it there for only cumulative or thrown it at Beyonder and hit the avoid.
Yes. Now, again, going back to that 11, I really think that new and improved level 8 uh, brute force slash strength
Uh,
special.
so Joe reveals at the end of his hand he has an unplayable teamwork, and all of that play back and forth of tucking cards and action leader. Um, Phil's able to squeak out the win. So now I remember from watching, I walked in and watched just a tiny bit of this game. I believe, I don't know where Phil's missions are. I believe Joe Peters was going 1 for the win at that hand, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I really think I didn't get to do the math there. We should have counted it. And maybe I'll count it later when I rewatch this. The decision to throw that 11 just a turn early, I really think he could have thrown just the new and improved 8 brute force or strength power card attack from Hobgoblin onto uh, Spawn and really gotten that effect. You
Well, and
mentioned it first, but
this is also one of those situations where I think this could be a little bit of Joe just being rusty coming back, but if you're going for the win, it seemed like Joe was really trying to keep the KO pressure on Spawn to mitigate a later battle. But the reality here is he could have just been throwing those at Mole Man, and
yes,
unless even if Mole Man had a 6, he's already used the Xavier Protocol basic universe card, so he could only get up to a 9 even if he had it. It wouldn't block the 11. He should have just been targeting those big attacks at Mole Man and just using that as a sink. Even if he has to eat the 8 energy, you're going for the win, and your 8 is going to be the same as the 8 strength that goes through on Hobgoblin. So I just think it was a little, I think that one hand with a little bit of a tweaked play, I think he could have put the game away right there.
yeah. And it was a fantastic play to action leader into the 11. I love that mechanic. I love the play. I think there was just a eagerness, and you just need to have a little more patience to let that battle kind of play out and just kind of, just be a slower, more measured approach, particularly because I don't think Phil at that point was showing any teamworks or any, string pressure where he couldn't have punted one more turn and then let that Magneto 11 rip.
I will tell you from my deck that I played last tournament, I was playing an intellect deck with Kingpin, and I was just running the single event to bring the reserve to the front line for a battle. And and I found that bringing Kingpin up, I was running the 9 and the draw 3 and just being really strict about not using up the home base placing slot. And I was winning so many games because suddenly I just brought him up and he had a draw 3 and a 9, and I would just bet heavy on those hands. So back to the table here. We didn't get to see exactly what the venture was. Somebody ran and conceded. I'm gonna guess
So
it.
my guess was that I think Phil conceded. I think that the game point, remember, Phil drew a card. So I think Joe was going at least 3 for the win, perhaps 4, and by losing that, he was behind where I think that next hand he could not bet for the win, but I think Joe just indicated that he's in his power pack, and Phil declined to cut it. So, I think we're at the point of the game where, unfortunately for Joe, I think he's kinda spent some of his best abilities in the deck. He's at least a few cards in the power pack. I know Phil is either there or close, but he looks to have telepathic manipulator, a JW, and just a lot of juice that is really good to have this late in the game.
Now, Joe Peters still has a lot of great moves here. He does have a place negate on Beast to deal with that telepathic manipulator. He's in his power pack, which Phil has got the energy staff placed to the home base, which is a 5 energy, can't be defended by a special, is a knockout shot for Magneto, but he should be, in theory, drawing a 5 every turn that he can hold in hand. So a lot of Phil's moves, Phil doesn't look like he has as much for his power pack. A lot of Phil's moves are going to be not as good. But however, Phil does have believe a morph activator in his hand, and as we've seen him do on camera already, we may see him use the morph card to copy the telepathic manipulator and just
Yes.
have it 2 times in a row, which can be pretty devastating. Then again, Joe Peters is in a situation here where if Phil throws the power mimicked telepathic manipulator against Beyonder, Joe can negate it, just throw the teamwork card, and not have any placed cards that Phil can get.
He also still has the Pure Void for Hobgoblin that's accessible to both of those heroes. So Phil doesn't have a great or a perfect target for telepathic manipulator, but again, just I think being a little slower to power pack, I think that's going to be a challenge for Joe. I think he's really got to try to put this one away again right now, or else Phil has a nice little advantage going.
So Phil goes 3. Joe draws a card. He has to discard it. It's a duplicate 7. He discards a duplicate 7 strength. Now, there's a possibility that he's drawn a 7 any power and he wants to be able to use it for teamwork follow ups to be able to go teamwork strength 7. I'm not sure. Or it could just be a duplicate 7 strength directly. Um, Joe's gonna play an Iron Man. Let's see what he gets.
Stealth
He's
armor.
target character must discard a placed card, and he targets the negate, or he targets something else, and he probably targeted the telepathic manipulator, and Phil just chose to negate it. And then Phil's got the speed from. He's throwing a spawn card from a dead spawn. So that I
No,
think
no,
is.
no. He has the event. So this
Oh,
event,
anyone can play anyone's
anyone's
special.
specials, and he said that was coming from White Queen. So
I
now he
see.
can follow. He's probably deciding whether he should follow with telepathic manipulator, but then if doesn't hit, he can't clone it. So instead, he follows up with the JW for the kill on Magneto.
Now, one thing that's interesting here, and I don't know if Phil realizes it, if that event is in play, that avoid on the home base works for any of the front line.
It does. That's really interesting. I'm not sure if Joe Peters will realize that. I don't think I realized it till you just said it.
That means he could throw the telepathic manipulator, and Phil's own event could snake him into having to go through that, and then he'd have the negate for the second one. I don't know what's happening here. Phil's looking at his battle site. I think Joe's just deciding how, if and how he's going to defend this, and
He
it
uses
makes
the 8.
which makes sense. Go ahead and use the 8. If he dies, you're not going to get to use it anyway. So, and he must not have had something lesser that could block the 3.
And you know what he said in Rocky 4? If he dies, he dies.
If he dies, he dies. All right, so Magneto's taken out. Joe Peters now has a max 7 team. With the Beyonder, when your characters die, Beyonder loses the grid. Once there's one left, his grid locks into that last character. So Beyonder is now, I believe, a 3-6-7-1. Oh no,
Oh, no. So this is super interesting. I guess well,
Joe
look,
for I think Joe for some reason didn't realize he could play that 7.
7 any, yeah.
And this is very nice. Again, tip of the hat to Phil Miller. This is a very gentlemanly move. Joe blocks it, Phil allows him, and then Joe concedes. So now we don't know what the venture is, but it clearly Phil got at least 3 up there. And based on the last few hands, Phil has definitely put himself back in reach. Phil has got a basic universe card that is going to be a big kill shot. Joe's got a couple of teamwork still. This is still anybody's game.
Let me just say, what a really gentlemanly move. Hats off to Phil Miller. I think there's some players in the old days that might just call a renege or otherwise say, "Yeah, I can't let you do that." But I think that's a really good move. Oh my goodness! So did you just see what happened?
Yep.
Phil is in Power Pack. Helping Hands event comes up. He duped on one card that's a true dupe, but he is able to keep, I
Well, if you
believe.
saw too the way he did that, he was very smart. This is a really subtle thing that I don't know if you picked up on there that Phil did that actually really mattered. Phil held his hand up and said, "One, I'm replacing the event now," which I believe is what you're supposed to do. You lay
Yes,
the
it is.
event down and you replace it. But I think some people don't always get that timing. Then he drew his 2 cards. And in this rare situation, he had 3 7s in a row. Some people, if they're a little lackadaisical about the timing, would have just been like, I draw my 2, cool, they're keepers. And then at the end of it, they go, all right, I forgot to draw my replacement. It is a dupe of one of these other ones. So understanding those timing rules in this case is unbelievably important because he drew the 7, he held up the one finger, he drew the 7 to replace the event. Then he drew the 2 cards, both of which were duplicates of the 7 that he drew. He gets to keep all 3. And I can't imagine at this point, whatever Phil's situation is, if you're in a power pack hand and you have a placed 8 and you drew all 3 7s and get to keep dupes, I don't think there's any world where you don't bet the farm here. Because whatever he bets, Joe Peters is almost certainly discarding it as dupes. The most he can get is 1 through 8.
Also, remember, Magneto's painted up with a multi-power hit and that 7 fighting Mind Slam, I believe, from the battle site. And so when he chooses, which I think he will, to throw an energy power card with that basic, he will kill Magneto, and then the 8 energy in hand, assuming Joe Peters has it, will be dead. So Phil's in a really commanding position here. And I'd like to think some of that's good karma from letting Joe take back that lack of defense of Magneto. So hats off to Phil for doing the right thing.
Mhm. And that's one of the things I want to say too about just a real good shout out to the awesome community that we have. People are always so supportive, trying to help each other build decks. We've worked very hard to cultivate it. So Phil here is just immediately taking his hits back. They're in power pack, so this is a mathematically known thing. Phil is throwing that as a level 10. Joe has no way in the game to generate a level 10. Phil's seen his entire deck. Phil knows that's an auto hit and will get rid of Joe Peters' ability to use level 8 power cards. So that is a pretty devastating card to have hit right now.
That's almost essentially a 15-point venture swing unless Joe somehow didn't have a level 8 in his hand, which is unlikely.
But just to get back to what we were saying, we've got a really great community, and we intentionally try to cultivate. We've even policed things where we try to say, don't call characters trash, don't write off other people's strategies. Because for one, most of the time you're wrong. People will develop different strategies you don't expect, and that's the fun part of the game. But also, there's enough communities out there that don't care about making it a positive, inclusive, really fun place to be. And I think that's where we've seen so many people who join our overpower community and just stay because it's just a really great place to find community that's positive and supportive. So Phil is doing his trick here. He's using the power mimic to copy a JW. So you know he's going to hit with this, and then he's most likely going to throw the 7, which can't be defended by a special card. Joe's going to block the JW with the 3. We're going to see one of the 3 sevens Phil has. And Joe Peters, if there was, oh, he's going to throw the 8 on
That's
Beyonder.
oof.
Oh, wow. That's, yeah, even better.
Now I don't know. No, it looks like he's just down to power cards now, but he has the energy staff. That would bring him to
Oh,
16. He's not there for the auto kill, but I mean he's getting closer to killing Beyonder.
now that we've seen Phil will be in Power Pack next hand, I'm gonna call this that I might actually do as a play here. I may save. I might actually heal the 3 off the Beyonder with the negate and just save the avoid for the telepathic manipulator. I mean, keeping Beyonder alive here is decently important.
Now, look, very interestingly, Mole Man has just the four fighting on him, and he lost Spawn, but this late in the game, you don't lose anything grid wise because of Doctor Strange. Phil's power pack is pristine; it should be almost untouched, and he's dragging at least 2 to 3 unique cards: the Energy Staff, the Telepathic Manipulator, and the 6 any Teamwork into the next battle if he doesn't play them. So he's in a good position. Really, I think he's kind of unfortunately for Joe Peters, outlasted the best of the Hobgoblin deck's tricks.
I think so. Joe Joe really has to protect his grid a lot more here. He does have 9 points of damage on Doctor Strange, but Phil's still got a couple cards in his hand. The only real Joe maybe can create some KO pressure with that teamwork of his own when he comes up. Phil did fire his off just now, and Phil's really trying to push through the Beyonder. I think what Phil wants is to make Joe have to get rid of that negate, which, like I said, I would just use it offensively for exactly this reason,
Right.
just to get it used. But I think Phil wants to kill Beyonder with all his power cards that he has every turn, then throw the telepathic manipulator at Beast. He can, if he sets that situation up, he can create a situation where Joe only has a max 6 character in the front. And if Phil hasn't won the game yet, he'll certainly have a venture victory in a hand with only Joe at a 6 fighting max.
Yeah, I think this is what Joe was really trying to think about. Um,
So Joe uses the avoid on the 7 finally.
that's
And
pretty much so because he has the energy staff for Mole Man there that is for the kill and cuts through the negate. There's not really anything Joe can do at this point. If he uses the negate to get through the 3 intellect, the telepathic manipulator will be live next battle to get that teamwork to beast. And so there's
so
just not really a lot left.
it looks like Joe concedes here. Joe's smart. He remembers when he runs from that hand that he can discard some of those cards into his dead pile, which looked like a 5 energy and a it's some kind of energy and an 8 energy. So he knows to cut those out. And that's, if I don't know if he was playing 7 energies, I wasn't paying as much attention, but any of the energies above a 3, I believe at this point, are dead. Yeah, and I think this is just a perfect example of two things. Ooh, Phil has 4 duplicates, 2
Woof.
sixes, a 5 and a 4. He does have an 8, he does have a 6. Now we know he doesn't have a 7 because he hasn't reshuffled yet, and all 3 of his 7s were in the earlier one. So Phil has 5 power cards to his name. He's got 7 cards total. Joe Peters has a negate that's probably not going to come into play, in a teamwork card. But yeah, Joe, I think Phil's going to be looking to run away here, and Joe's going to be looking to try to get a big venture bet back so that he can try to get rid of Doctor Strange. I think that's his only avenue to victory here.
This is just such an absolute banger of a matchup. I really don't know who's going to win this. I mean, it's really been back and forth. I believe they're both towards Power Pack here with just enough interesting cards to keep the strategy of this interesting. If you look at Phil's position right now, if he were to try to fight and use the energy staff for the kill, he would kill him, but Joe could fire off that 6 any teamwork. Wait, what happened? Looks like there was an offered handshake.
I think they're counting missions here. Oh, it might have been we might have had the timing wrong here as well. It could have been that time ran out, and Joe might not have been able to mathematically bet for the win, which is, I assume, what happened.
Yeah,
Or Joe might have just seen the writing on the wall. I will say, Phil, one thing that Phil did good here, why that was kind of a textbook match, Phil really picked exactly the right pieces of Joe's kit to get rid of. He got rid of the Hobgoblin card. He attacked the grid and got rid of the 8 after the big battle with the action leader. And I think the thing this goes to show is in high level play, just throwing that 11 2 turns early was really the turning point in the match. I think had Joe just just thrown kind of poked with the jab, so to speak, to use a boxing reference. If he had just jabbed with that 7, jabbed with that 8 strength that was for the kill, and saved that 11 for later, or if he had just said, all I care about is building up numbers, I'm going to throw everything at Mole Man. The best he can do is negate or defend with a 6. I think you would have just seen. I think you would have seen him win that battle, and we would have a completely different outcome to this tournament. We'd see Hobgoblin in the finals. So, just a testament to two great players that made a game actually come out that close.
really entertaining. Hats off to both of them. And I think it's a challenge that I run into to turn off the instinct to defend your heroes or even to defend your placement when it's game point and just kind of go all in and be patient, let characters die as they're needed and to make the needed sacrifices. I think Joe was right there. Just that 11 was maybe one turn too early.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Bless you. Well, what a great match. I think we're looking for a really interesting final between the Strangler and I believe Justin Sadie was able to defeat
Carl,
Carl.
Carl.
And it's
Absolutely.
unfortunate that we did not get to see Hobgoblin in the final, but to see two Hobgoblin decks in the semifinals put on fantastic matches, really interesting, really exciting. And we do get to see Justin, who's not new to the community, but one of our newer players. He started to play somewhere around the same time as the Costa twins, face off against one of, if not the top players in the game. It's got to be usually Phil or Phil. So we have Phil Miller, at least America, top one or two player against a really interesting deck from Justin, and we'll see you over at that final table.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Dave.